Hey guys, I'm going to try to solve one of these allocating overhead problems from chapter 4. This is the try it problem 4.4. It's on page 132 in the book. The problem reads, Donna Corporation manufactures custom cabinets for kitchens. It uses normal costing system with two direct cost categories, direct materials and direct manufacturing labor, and one indirect cost pool, manufacturing overhead costs. It provides the following information about manufacturing overhead costs for 2017. And it gives us all this information here. The following information is available as of December the 31st, 2017. It gives us this information, gives us the account balances before proration, and then it gives us the manufacturing overhead allocated in each account balance in the current year. And then it wants us to calculate the over allocated manufacturing overhead at the end of 2017 and prorate it to work in process control, finished goods control, and cost of goods sold accounts based on the allocated manufacturing overhead in each account balance using normal costing. Okay, so what are they really asking here? Well, basically, they want us to figure out how much overhead was allocated. Is that amount of overhead under or over allocated? And then they want us to adjust for the under or overhead allocation rate based on how much is in these accounts. Okay, so 3 parts to that. The first thing we'll do is we'll just figure out over under allocation. Okay, so how do we do that? We got to figure out the allocation rate. Okay, so the allocation rate is equal to the estimated overhead allocation is equal to total estimated overhead divided by total base. Okay, so the total estimated overhead, budgeted manufacturing overhead costs are $960,000. So that's 960,000. And then we need to divide that by $960,000 divided by the base, and they're using direct manufacturing labor hours, so that's 32,000 direct manufacturing, direct labor hours. Okay, and that equals 960 divided by 32,000, and that equals $30 per direct labor hour. Okay, so that's what their allocation rate is. Now we need to figure out how many, to get the amount of overhead allocated, we've got to figure out, overhead allocated. Okay, that's actual overhead allocated. That's important. Okay, so the actual amount of overhead is actual overhead allocated is equal to the actual hours times the estimated times the rate, excuse me. Okay, so the actual hours, they use 31,000 multiplied times our rate, which is 30. That equals times 30. So our actual overhead allocated is okay, 930,000. Now we need to figure out, are we over or under allocated? Okay, lucky for us, that's pretty easy, because if the actual overhead allocated was 930,000, it already tells us right here that the actual manufacturing overhead costs were 992,000. Okay, so all we have to do there is take the actual cost minus the allocated cost, and that equals 992,000 minus 930,000. That equals okay. So we're 62,000. Now we have to figure out, is that under or over allocated? Well, right here it says actual overhead allocated is 930,000, but they actually used 992,000, so we don't have enough allocated there. We needed to be at 992, but we're only at 930, so we're under allocated. Okay. Now we talked about in class, there's a few ways to dispose of this under or overhead allocated. We could do it all to cost of goods sold, and if we were going to do that all to cost of goods sold, we're under allocated, so we would debit cost of goods sold, or excuse me, cost of goods sold debit for 62,000 and credit manufacturing overhead 62,000. Okay, but that's one way to dispose of it. Then that 62,000 goes away. But in the problem, it wants us to spread that out amongst the work in process, the finished goods, and the cost of goods sold. So what we're going to have to do is figure out how much of this 62,000 are we going to have to place in each one of these accounts. How much is going to go to work in process, how much is going to go to finished goods, and how much is going to go to cost of goods sold. So in order to do that, we have to figure out what percentage of that total. Let me just total it up here. What percentage of that 960,000 total was allocated to each one of these, and then we have to allocate this 62,000 in the same percentage as that it was before. So let's make a new column, percentage allocated, Okay, and to find that, all we have to do is take this number, divide it by the total allocated, and that looks like 1.5%. Do the same thing here, divide it by the total allocated, and it looks like most of it was allocated to cost of goods sold. That's 96%. Now, to figure out the dollar amount, okay, dollar amount allocated, we take the amount of the amount under allocated right there, take this amount, multiply times that $930. Do the same thing here. Take this amount, the total, 2.5% of that is $1,500. And then here we take this amount, multiply it times that, and it's 59,520. So this is the amount that we need to allocate to each one of these accounts based on these percentages in order to dispose of that under allocated. Now I will make that comment because, and he mentioned this in class, because most of this, like 96% of it, is in the cost of goods sold, it would make more sense just to simply debit cost of goods sold for the whole amount, debit 62,000, and credit MO 62,000, and that would do the same thing. But let's just imagine that these numbers were 33%, 33%, 33%. Then we would have to allocate them differently, and we would need to use those percentages. So that's why we use this split method when it's appropriate. In this case, it wasn't appropriate, but it's a good demonstration of how to do the problem. So I hope this helps, and good luck on your test.